We welcome you to the Ventura County SELPA's Pathways to Success Dispute Prevention and Resolution series. This series provides essential skills to help you as an IEP facilitator or IEP team member navigate and resolve conflicts that arise during IEP meetings and can at times strain relationships between families and schools. We recognize that unresolved conflicts impact a student's academic success, and our goal is to help you build stronger, more collaborative partnerships. Each session in this series contains ready-to-use tools, techniques, and strategies that can be applied immediately to improve communication and foster a more collaborative environment for student success. My name is Stacy Alvey, and I serve as the team's director.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Aguirre. I'm the team's program specialist.
Our vision is to build understanding, strengthen relationships, and achieve student-centered solutions. You can learn more about the SELPA's Dispute Prevention and Resolution Services by going to our website at the link provided on the presentation or by going to the SELPA's website at vcselpa.org. Today's presentation focuses on conflict management strategies, and you can access registration for the remaining 2 sessions through the Ventura County SELPA's professional development calendar, which you can also access at the SELPA's website. The presentation slides will be available once the recorded video has been uploaded to the Ventura County Office of Education's YouTube channel and placed under the video description. You can actually now watch the first 4 recorded webinars in the series, with the most recent 2 available hopefully within the week. Also, your feedback is extremely important to us, and we truly appreciate your willingness to complete, and we mean this, a very brief survey at the end of the presentation. We also want to remind you that this session is being recorded, and once the recording has ended, Peter and I will make ourselves available for any questions you may have. So with that, let's begin. Conflict management strategies are the active facilitation skills, tools, and strategies utilized by the facilitator throughout the IEP meeting. As we previously highlighted, conflict is inevitable. It's inevitable in every relationship, especially when team members are passionate about a student's needs. Our goal today is to increase your understanding of how to facilitate an IEP meeting so you can support collaborative conversations and relationships for the benefit of the student. As a result of today's webinar presentation, you'll be able to facilitate a structured meeting startup to establish a collaborative environment and support for the IEP process, identify and utilize process tools that generate momentum and keep the meeting moving forward, and apply advanced strategies to navigate impasse while preserving the parent-school relationship. To facilitate a structurally sound meeting, we'll draw on the skills we've previously explored during this series, such as active listening, neutrality, and group support. As the quote on this slide suggests, effective conflict management is rooted in the work we lay beneath the ground. This facilitated process through both pre-work and in-meeting facilitation builds what we call a rapport bank, so the team doesn't enter the room already with a lack of trust. Because we must address the environment to effectively change behavior, the facilitated IEP framework is essential for both prevention and response. It allows us to repair foundations when relationships are struggling, and it provides the clarity needed for strong teams to stay productive. By proactively setting the stage and responsively navigating difficult moments, we ensure the student remains the cornerstone. Most of the topics we'll touch on today have been discussed during our 5 previous webinars. However, what makes today unique is the emphasis on putting it all together, creating a complete picture of the various components of meeting facilitation. We view the facilitated IEP meeting as a journey, and like any trip you take, you have to first decide where you're going and then plot the course. This is the startup phase of the IEP, where facilitators handle introductions, define the meeting's purpose, and review the agenda to ensure every team member is moving in the same direction. Next, it's the developmental phase, which is the heart of the IEP meeting. Here, the meeting agenda serves as a trail map, so to speak, as the team navigates through the students' data and the content needed to reach collaborative decisions. Finally, we reach the closing. And just as you'd ensure a safe arrival on a trip, we wrap up the IEP meeting by finalizing agreements and determine the next steps for implementation. We'll use these three stages, the startup, the development, and the closing, to frame exactly how facilitation works within the meeting. And as we discuss these strategies and resources, we want to remind you to ensure you're following your specific district processes and procedures. If any of these strategies are different from your district, the district's established protocols, we encourage you to take this information back to your leadership and share how you might be able to incorporate these practices into your IEP facilitation. The meeting begins with the moment the family arrives at the school or enters the virtual waiting room. And how you start this process is an opportunity to set a positive tone from the start. This takes carefully thought out actions that communicate a desire to work collaboratively with the intention of working as a true team. So a welcome greeting goes a long way. For in-person meetings, consider using a greeter, someone who meets the parent at the front office so they walk to the room together. School staff should also consider the optics of a parent walking into a room where a conversation between team members suddenly stops. Aim for a warm welcome. For example, have school staff stand to greet the parent. This communicates respect. You can coordinate this with staff ahead of time, explaining that this helps the family feel like valued members of the team. It's different in a virtual meeting. In virtual meetings, holding a parent in a waiting room past the start time can create the perception that the team is discussing them, which can cause anxiety and can contribute to conflict. Even if unintentional, this hurts trust. If you must coordinate logistics with the staff, like regarding the process and not the content, do it early. Then have everyone join at once. If there are last-minute questions from staff who jump on early, you can answer the logistical questions, then have the staff members jump off and then re-enter with the parent at the same time. Alternatively, if someone's running late, you can admit the parent immediately, even if you're still waiting on staff, to provide transparency. Regardless of the setting, use waiting time to connect. Small talk helps ease anxiety and bridges the gap. You can discuss the students' contributions, a recent success, or even the weather or vacation plans to avoid awkward silences. This allows for connection and prevents the process from feeling cold like it sometimes can. Lastly, lead with a student-centered opening that grounds the group. You can say something like, "Welcome. Thank you all for collaborating today to support Sean through his IEP. This will be an opportunity to support Sean's strengths and growth, and for you to talk about how to appropriately continue supporting his education." Using the student's name reminds the group that this is more than a legal requirement. It's about a real child with real needs, supported by a team that cares.
And as Stacy was mentioning how we can start with a positive tone, we also wanted to identify what you could do after you've welcomed the family and made your student-centered opening. So you'll want to ensure that there's agreement on the purpose and outcome of that meeting. So remember from our previous sessions, we discussed the importance of checking for mutual understanding on these two items. By establishing this understanding ahead of the meeting, you can quickly move into the next part of the meeting. You may need to pause and clarify if needed, and discuss how the group would like to proceed if a mutual understanding of these purposes and outcomes does not exist. So bringing that student-centered opening that Stacy mentioned together with the purpose and outcome check, it may sound something like this. "Welcome. Thank you all for collaborating today to support Sean through his IEP. it's clear that you all are committed to this process. The purpose of today's meeting is to provide an annual review of Sean's IEP. Is that everyone's understanding? Great. Then let's talk about the proposed outcome for today's meeting. Outcomes for this meeting are to have a mutual understanding of Sean's strengths and challenges, including his progress on current goals, what goals he will need moving forward, and what supports and services are needed in order for Sean to receive the educational benefit from his program. At the conclusion of the meeting, the district will then provide an offer for his educational program. So what questions might you have, if any, regarding the proposed outcomes of this meeting? You see, by clearly stating this, you can determine if there's that shared understanding. If there are unmet expectations about this outcome or purpose of the meeting, ask what team members are hoping to discuss. You can ask something like, can you share with the group your understanding of what this meeting is regarding? If the parent mentions an item that belongs in the meeting, clarify how it fits within the outcomes. And if it falls outside the scope of the IEP, consider using a parking lot, which we'll be discussing shortly. So following agreement on the purpose and outcomes of the meeting, provide introductions for the team. You can go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. Following the agreement on the purpose and outcomes of the meeting, provide introductions for the team. Use the format discussed in our first session, where participants share their name, 2, their role, 3, how they work with the student, and 4, what information they will share during the meeting. As the facilitator, you will also need to establish clarity on how you will support the group. This is critical because people often don't fully grasp the facilitator's role or how the process will be managed. It's an opportunity to explain that your job is to ensure everyone is heard and that the team stays track on the agenda. This is also the time to highlight that if you will be switching between 2 roles, such as maybe the facilitator or another IEP team member like the district representative. To learn more about crafting a strong introduction, please refer back to our first session, Pathways to Successful IEP Meetings, where we dive deep into this topic. Keep in mind that this is a way of doing introductions that may be new to some, so be prepared to model it yourself first, and then gently remind each team member to answer those specific questions as they go. After introductions, you'll want to introduce the agenda. In our previous session, Session 5, Conflict Prevention Strategies, we reviewed how to develop one. You are utilizing the agenda as your trail map for the meeting. It is important to introduce this early as it's a powerful tool that keeps the team focused on the items that need to be discussed and helps the group reach those intended outcomes. And as we discussed in our previous session, it's best to share this agenda ahead of the meeting so that it's more likely that everyone is on the same page prior to that meeting. So you will also want to take the time to share how you will indicate items are agreed upon as you go through that agenda. So for situations where agenda items are requested at the last minute, because that can happen, you can pause and identify where those topics already fit within the agenda. Consider making a mark on the document, the agenda itself, or highlighting the specific sections that cover those individuals' concerns if they bring them up at the time of the meeting. For example, if a parent asks to discuss behavior issues, you can pause and indicate that behavior will be covered during the present level section. Then, depending on that discussion, specific supports will be addressed under special education services, supports, and accommodations, or within the proposed behavior intervention plan, and you might indicate that right there on the agenda. In some circumstances, there might be items that were accidentally left off the agenda or unclear. For requested items that could be added, bring the proposal to the group and ask if there is agreement to add that to the agenda. As the facilitator, you can make a recommendation for where that item might flow best in the conversation. Now, for items that fall outside the purpose of the IEP and are requested at the last minute, or items that are not pertinent to the meeting, you can utilize the parking lot, which ensures that those thoughts are captured without derailing the current process and conversation or that agenda. And we'll be reviewing that shortly. As you are reviewing the agenda, you will also want to share how you will be pausing between each section to check for agreement on the various components of the IEP. Part of the facilitator's support is to check for agreement before the group moves on from one discussion item to the next. It is important that some type of response is given from all team members, so there's active participation. Clarify that this agreement or that response doesn't always have to be a formal statement. It can be as simple as a head nod or a thumbs up or a quick vocal yes. You can then review with the group that you will mark agreement directly on the agenda to make it visual for all to see. This could be a check mark, a big letter A, or any other indicator that marks there is agreement within that item. So within the IEP process, there are a number of opportunities for agreement, even starting at the very, very beginning of the meeting. The idea is to highlight how the group can work together and find common ground. So when you propose the purpose of the meeting and there's agreement, there you go, you have agreement. When you go over the norms and their agreement, there's another spot. See, this is especially important to highlight that agreement if there's going to be disagreement later on. This approach isn't meant to force parties to agree just because they've been doing so for the majority of the meeting. Rather, it visually highlights that the group is capable of coming to an agreement. There may be times you need to leverage this concept. As we've talked about during our previous webinars, and we've mentioned already within this webinar, the parking lot is a process tool that helps keep the discussion focused on the agreed upon agenda items and helps to lower the temperature of conflict, or actually keeping it from brewing in the first place. Remember that a facilitated meeting is also an efficient meeting. Now, that is not to say that parent concerns are not important. In fact, the parking lot highlights those concerns as important by ensuring there's a dedicated plan for follow-up. So the parking lot can be a piece of paper, a flip chart with the words parking lot written at the top like we have in this visual, or a shared digital document where the group can see items being added. As items come up throughout the meeting that are not related to the agreed upon purpose or they fall outside of the agenda, you acknowledge the request first and then write it down. So for example, if a parent wants to understand why the bell schedule is set up a specific way, you can say something along the lines of, your question about the bell schedule is important, and it sounds like our principal can tell you more about that. I'm going to write that down on the parking lot, and the principal can follow up with you right after the meeting today. You see, by identifying what the item is, when it will be addressed, with whom, you provide transparency and ensure that the team stays on track while the parent still feels heard. And norms can be introduced before or after the agenda review. For meetings where high emotions may shut down conversations, you may want to consider introducing those norms prior to the agenda to set this team up on the right foot. If the team has been collaborating well, you can review them right after that agenda. To ensure they're accessible, provide the norms as a handout or post them on the wall or display them as a shared screen in a video conference so they remain visible to all. It is important to take your time here, as agreement on these norms is essential before moving on. And if needed, explain what is meant by concepts such as assume positive intentions to ensure there is a mutual understanding of what that means. That may sound like it's unnecessary, but not everyone shares the same definition of being open or listening carefully. And you need to give examples, especially if it's more of these bigger constructs. There may be times in a meeting that you may need to point back to these norms and remind the team of their commitment to the norms. This careful review of these norms helps ensure that when they made agreement, they did it with their full intention. Now, as suggested in our previous session, these norms can be shared ahead of time for input. But remember, They are only proposed until the group agrees upon them in that meeting, in that room during that meeting. So after reviewing the norms, ask the group what else might be needed and whether there is agreement. If there are suggestions for new norms, ask the entire group if they agreed to those additions. If a proposal for an additional norm is unclear, ask an open-ended question such as, can you tell us how respecting one another would look in this setting? Once the group agrees, keep the norms accessible so you can easily revisit them later if needed. And if you're on a virtual platform, just have them off to the side and you might have the screen share if you need to review them again. You can learn more about the creation of norms in our Session 5, Conflict Prevention Strategies, where we talk about conflicts and how to navigate those, how we can prepare for conflicts ahead of time. Once the norms are agreed upon, you will transition into the main agenda items. While this process may seem like it adds more time to the meeting, this introduction process is all really relatively short. All these items should really take no more than 8 minutes. And you will find that this proactive foundational work saves significant time later in the meeting because it supports that efficiency without sacrificing important discussion.
Thanks, Peter. So after you start the journey at the IEP meeting, you are now facilitating what's called the content of the meeting. This is the stage where information is shared and ideas are proposed and decisions are made. This is where all your facilitative prep work and active facilitation skills will support the team in their discussion. So as you facilitate the discussion, remember that in the facilitator role, you are functioning within the process, right? That feeling, that creation of a safe space in the meeting. You're not adding to the content of the meeting unless you are operating in dual roles, right? Unless you're functioning as a facilitator and then maybe as the LEA representative or a case manager. If that's the case, we encourage you to watch webinar 2, Elements of Facilitation. Once the opening section of the agenda has been concluded, the majority of the dialogue should occur directly between the IEP team members. You're there just to support and guide that conversation only if it's needed, ensuring the group remains focused on the student and the established outcomes. So as you move through the agenda and the group is communicating with each other, the facilitator must continuously listen beyond just the words. You're going to listen for what isn't necessarily being said. Clarification is essential, and if the team isn't naturally utilizing clarification to build a mutual understanding, then you're going to want to model this for them. So for example, a parent may say, I never feel like I have good communication with the school. As the facilitator, you might ask, would you be willing to share with the rest of the team what good communication would look like for you, so all of you as a team can make some needed adjustments? Additionally, as you move through an agenda item and it becomes clear the group is ready to transition, you're going to want to pause and check if any participants have questions or need clarification. You can't clarify enough and ensure that there's mutual understanding enough. Use an open-ended prompt such as, what questions might you have, if any? This wording truly invites response, whereas a closed-ended question, something that just gets answered with a simple yes or no, do you have any questions, might inadvertently shut down further elaboration. So you'll want to perform these check-ins at least during the transitions between the agenda items or after a thorough discussion on a specific topic. At these pauses, you'll also want to check for agreement as mentioned earlier. And if the group is in agreement, mark it clearly on the agenda. So as we've discussed regarding the agenda, the norms, the parking lot, for example, visuals are essential tools for clarity, and they transform spoken words into visible, lasting points of reference. They help make the meeting accessible for all team members. We always hear people say whenever we're doing trainings that they are visual learners. The reality is that information without a visual component is easily forgotten for most people. So especially when so much information is being discussed. As you prepare for a facilitated meeting, consider what visual tools you'll use, such as whiteboards, flip charts, projectors, or screen sharing. At a minimum, consider using visuals for your meeting agenda, the norms, and a parking lot. Depending on district practices, you may also share specific documents, like the goals, for example. So plan ahead for these needs and decide if you require a charter. That's someone who's notating the visual group memory on the documents. This is a different role from the person that's taking notes on the actual IEP document in the Cyrus system. If you use a charter, ensure you coordinate with them before the meeting begins. So key items to visualize include your agenda and your norms, because you're going to be referring to these, specifically the agenda for sure. The students' strengths and challenges. Remember, the challenge is tied directly to the goals, so it's helpful to see them visually as there's a discussion about the goals and the accommodations and the services. The advantages and disadvantages of a proposal as the team's discussing them or comparing multiple proposals, your parking lot, and any brainstorming conversations. Visuals improve accessibility and they encourage participation. So here's something you may not have thought about. Writing out a participant's ideas and checking with them for accuracy, writing it down helps to communicate that they've truly been heard. And as we continue our session, we'll continue to highlight ideas for making items visual, because this really helps to manage conflict. So we've discussed how to indicate agreement and reinforce the group's ability to collaborate. However, it's likely that at some point in an IEP meeting, there will be some level of disagreement. A disagreement doesn't have to mean the conversation is lost or the path forward is unclear. While the final solutions are for the team members to decide, the facilitator can help get the group to avoid getting stuck. So the first and most important step is to ensure that there's clarity regarding the items of disagreement. Sometimes what appears to be a conflict is simply just a misunderstanding. And other times there is clarity, but just a genuine difference of opinion. In either case, the facilitator can use paraphrasing and open-ended questions as some tools to help. When paraphrasing, you're going to want to highlight the key components back to the group and check for accuracy. You're just restating in your own words what's been said. So, for example, based on what you shared, what I'm hearing you say is that you feel one-on-one support will help with the student socialization. Did I get that right? Next, support the other party to have an opportunity to ask questions. So based on the parents' thoughts regarding socialization support, what questions might you have as a school staff member? And if the group is struggling to find clarity, you may model questions the staff may ask the parents, such as, will you share with the group specifically what about one-on-one support will help with the socialization? Finally, if the why or the underlying interest behind a specific request is not apparent, help bring it out into the open. So for example, if you discover the parent wants one-on-one support, for example, because they want their child to have more friendships, you can help label it by saying something like, it sounds like a sense of belonging is very important for your child. Once this interest is out in the open, the group can transform or brainstorm, multiple ways to support that sense of belonging. So when a disagreement occurs, the role of the facilitator is to empower the group to resolve it themselves. That's relieving, right? You don't have to do everything as a facilitator. In fact, you shouldn't be. Remember, you're there to just support this dialogue in a constructive manner. As you see on this slide, the facilitator acts as a light in the middle of a foggy forest. When emotions run high, or the path forward becomes difficult to follow, the group is at risk of getting lost on their journey. Your support instills hope that the team can find their way back to the trail. You do this by remaining neutral, maintaining the process, and reminding the group that they can work through the challenge. To ensure collaborative team discussion, return questions to team members to answer, either to the team members with specific expertise, and that of course includes the parent, or the team as a whole. So for example, if a parent asks, how can the school arbitrarily decide on these service minutes? You can paraphrase the statement first by saying, it sounds like you want to know what considerations were made regarding the service minutes, and then request a staff member who provided an assessment, for example, to respond by asking, will you please share what led to your service minute recommendations? We call that boomeranging a question. In dual role situations where you are functioning as a facilitator and an IEP team member, explicitly label your transition between each role by saying something like, to answer that, I'm going to speak now from my role as Sean's special education teacher. By staying calm, clear, and supportive, you ensure your light remains steady, helping the team navigate the fog without being pulled into the disagreement yourself. So here's some sample language facilitators can utilize to gain clarity, identify underlying interests, encourage dialogue, and help move the team forward towards resolution. If you're watching this webinar as a recording, you may want to pause here and reflect on these questions, or take your camera right now and just take a picture of the slide. We'll give you a few seconds to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Stacy. So, disagreement is not a failure of the group, nor is it a failure of your facilitation. It's very important to recognize. It's honestly inevitable at some point among team members who are all different people with different perspectives. The goal is simply to move through the disagreement and get towards a resolution. Now, where it gets tricky is when, after a thorough clarification and exploration, the team finds itself at an impasse. This is a point where both parties are showing resistance to finding an agreeable solution. So you might be finding yourself asking yourself, what can I do if both parties are unwilling to move from their positions? So over the next few slides, we will look at specific strategies to help nudge that group forward when they seem completely stuck. When an impasse occurs, meaning that both parties are dug into their positions and see only their own idea as the way forward, your goal as the facilitator is to generate momentum. This isn't just about moving on to avoid the problem. It's about creating movement toward resolution while keeping this team's relationship intact. The first step in addressing the impasse is to, again, dial in the specific details of a proposed idea to a point where they are fully understood. As we discussed earlier, using visuals can make a proposal stand out and be clear. So consider writing the proposal out on a shared screen or a flip chart, whiteboard, whatever you have as a writing platform for all to see. Do not assume that everyone shares the same understanding of what a request actually means. You need to be specific. For example, if a parent is insistent on behavior support, ask them to share with the group what they envision that support looks like in practice. Remember, as mentioned earlier, if participants are not asking effective questions, you as the facilitator can model the process by using open-ended prompts. So once there is a mutual understanding of the proposal on the table, you can begin to use advanced facilitative tools to see if the group can work towards consensus. It is important to define what consensus means in this context, though. Often team members mistakenly view consensus as everyone is 100% in love with an idea. But that isn't the case. Consensus is defined by team members' willingness to live with and support a proposal that can reasonably be implemented. Working towards consensus allows people to feel comfortable with a decision, even if it wasn't their first choice. As our visual shows here, there's a path towards consensus, and your starting point will most likely vary. At times, you may determine that the team can reach consensus quickly by simply asking, "Are you all in agreement?" Other times, it may become apparent that the group may need to walk through a more purposeful exploration of ideas. This can be accomplished by starting with brainstorming or adjusting a proposal so that the group can navigate through disagreement or impasse. Ultimately, as the facilitator, your job is to select the appropriate technique and when to use it in order to help the team get one step closer to their final destination. So this is not a linear process. So think about it. You likely wouldn't start from scratch with a brainstorming session to figure out goals. Probably have some rough idea, and hopefully staff can come to the meeting with proposals that can be adjusted if needed. So let's take a look at each of these skills individually. As you begin moving the conversation forward, start with the ideas surrounding the specific area that caused the impasse. For example, there may be a stalemate or an impasse regarding behavior support. The parent may insist on a one-to-one aid, while the district feels a comprehensive behavior intervention plan should be implemented first. At this stage, you're navigating the clarification process and opening the discussion to new possibilities. It is vital that the group understands that sharing possibilities is strictly for idea generation. Proposing an idea does not mean the team is committed to it yet. This is creating a safe space for brainstorming that allows for creativity without the pressure of immediate agreement or the commitment of district resources. So acknowledge what has already been proposed, and then ask the group to think beyond those initial ideas. This is where identifying interest becomes incredibly helpful, especially when both parties share the same underlying goal or interest. For example, you might say something like, "Based on your shared concern for Sean's safety, what other ideas does the group have to support him in a way that ensures he remains safe?" Now, there are times when, after information has been shared and thorough discussion has occurred, the district may feel they have no other viable option than what has been proposed. This step is still valuable in those moments, especially if the parent needs their ideas to be heard. Ultimately, this demonstrates the group has made serious considerations and provided genuine opportunities for meaningful participation and input. And through this process, it's always possible that a new, valuable element could be added to the district's recommendation that strengthens the overall plan. The district's proposed recommendation. After idea sharing has occurred and the group remains at an impasse, you can begin to narrow the focus to one or two specific proposals. To evaluate them objectively, develop a T-chart, listing advantages on one side and disadvantages on the other side. As you start this process, remind the group that the goal is not to defend individual proposals, but it's to step back and objectively examine the possible impacts of each one of those proposals or proposal. Ask the group to reserve judgment as the proposals are shared. It is also crucial to let the team members know that the number of advantages versus disadvantages does not determine which proposal is selected. It's really about the quality and weight of those factors that are involved. So you may introduce this idea this way. Let's take a look at the advantages and disadvantages of adding SAI math. As you share your thoughts, please hold judgment and simply explore the idea with the group. We will list the advantages and then we'll go into the disadvantages until the group feels that they have captured all their thoughts. Now keep in mind that the number of the items listed under each column does not dictate the final decision. This is simply to help see the full picture. You see, if you have more than one proposal in the mix, you can create separate T-charts for each and clearly label the name of the proposals at the top of each chart so the group can compare them side by side. So moving along, as you narrow in on a possible proposal and get closer to your destination, you still may face a lingering impasse. This is the perfect time to use the technique of adjusting the proposal. With this technique, you take a specific proposal and ask, what might you add or remove from this idea to make it more agreeable? While you can do this vocally by just saying it out loud, using a visual like a shared document or whiteboard to write down the input is highly effective for keeping the team focused. And just as we stated previously, simply asking this question and hearing another party's input does not mean you are agreeing to that change. You're simply gathering information and taking it into consideration. Often facilitators or team members are fearful of hearing ideas because of the fallacy that if an idea is shared, they're on the hook to accept it or risk making the other party angry if we disagree or if they disagree. However, the why behind the idea exists for that individual, whether they speak it or not. By getting those needs out in the open, you can work with the individual and gain a better understanding of their perspective. This is critical at an impasse because people will not agree to a solution they feel a foundational need when they feel a foundational need is being ignored. So at this point, the group could be nearing the final destination, reaching consensus and moving away from that impasse. The straw poll is a technique used after a proposal has been thoroughly discussed or it's clear that there might be some level of agreement. So what the facilitator is doing is they're checking the level of agreement by asking a clear, just direct question. Are we in agreement with this proposal? This is where the concept of a clear communicative response done by all participants has the greatest impact. As the facilitator, you scan the room for a response from every individual, every IEP team member. This doesn't have to be a formal vote. In fact, we're going to highlight that that's not what we're looking here. It's just a simple check-in to see if you can get a head nod, a thumbs up, or a verbal yes from every individual. Every participant needs to respond. And remember, this is not a voting mechanism. It's simply a tool to provide the group with clarity on whether there is a shared agreement. Remember, these strategies are not a one-way street. You can move backward if agreement isn't reached as you travel down the path. For example, if you pose the question of whether there's agreement or not, and one participant says no, you can simply pivot back to adjusting the proposal technique or even revisiting the advantages and disadvantages. Each check-in ensures that the final agreement is stable and supported by the whole team. Now there's the negative poll, which is a variation of the straw poll. And this is used to draw out a minority opinion or utilized for efficiency when you anticipate mostly every team member is already in agreement. This is a critical moment. As we know, some individuals may appear to be in agreement during the meeting, but the moment they leave, they may refuse to sign the IEP or feel their voice was truly not heard, leading to further concerns down the road. See, the IEP meeting is the ideal time for disagreement to be examined and for all voices to be heard. To use a negative poll, instead of asking who agrees, you actually ask, does anyone have concerns or disagreements with this proposal that have not already been addressed? This approach allows the group to examine these hidden concerns safely. If a concern is raised, it provides the opportunity to move back, like we were mentioning earlier, back to those earlier facilitation techniques we shared, such as the advantages or disadvantages, or adjusting the proposal, or going back to sharing ideas. By surfing these issues now, you ensure the final agreement is genuine and sustainable.
Thanks, Peter. The facilitator as well is responsible for maintaining the psychological safety within the meeting. And while an IEP meeting is a right, that does not mean either party can actively attack another or shift toward personal issues that are not centered on the student. When a participant steps outside of the agreed upon norms, it can be tricky. Direct correction can look like you're taking sides or managing a person. Instead, what you want to do is open the discussion up to the group on how the norms are working for them. Remind them that these are the very norms they created and agreed to during the introductions. Acknowledge the emotion first and then pivot back to the norms. You could say something like, these topics are vital and it makes sense that they lead to passion. Passion is important, but respect is what keeps the conversation productive. So let's check in on our norms and see if we are still in agreement with the process we propose for our work together today. In instances where the group needs time to regain composure or process emotions, a break can be really effective, but be careful not to call a break too early as it can interrupt a productive flow. Intervention is going to be warranted only when the emotion detracts from the focus on the student or impacts collaboration. If you take a break, assign a task. Ask the participants to think through a specific piece of information or consider potential next steps. Without a task, people may simply ruminate on their frustrations. So set a clear time for the break and confirm a commitment to return. Lastly, if communication becomes severely aggressive, including threats, name-calling, or intentional moves to divert the focus away from the student, you may need to stop the meeting. And while this is the last resort, you must recognize when a conversation is no longer being productive. Clearly state that the IEP process will continue and that you'll work to reschedule the meeting in a way that supports everyone's participation. Even in these circumstances, look for ways to keep communication open regarding the next steps and the scheduling for a follow-up session. While we just discussed the worst case scenario where a meeting must end, those situations should really be rare. And if you follow the facilitation steps we've outlined, especially, they'll be rare. So separate from those rare threats to psychological safety, let's examine what to do if you've utilized every strategy, both preventative and responsive, and there's still no movement during the IEP. This can be really tricky and frustrating place for the group. And worst of all, the student's IEP may become stuck in a stay put status, delaying the implementation of needed and updated supports. However, in these challenging situations, there's still ways to gain momentum and find a path forward. As a first step, you'll want to review all the hard work the group has already done up until these moments. Can you see why it's so important to identify on that agenda all the agreements that have already been reached? Review where there's been agreement and instill that hope that the group can work through this as well. It's an important job as a facilitator, that instilling of hope. And next, you'll want to wring issues dry. Ensure the dialogue is truly complete by asking if there's any additional information to share. You can check this by asking, again, what additional information, if anything, needs to be shared. You'll also want to check if individuals need further clarification by asking what items might need further clarification. And then you need to double check if there are any additional thoughts that have not already been shared by saying what additional ideas, thoughts outside of those already shared can be presented. When the team has no more information, thoughts, or questions, you can safely move on with the discussion. At this point, it's time to move forward. It's time to move forward by discussing items that have full agreement. And these are easy. You can simply highlight the successful collaboration that's occurred. For partial agreements, emphasize the areas where the team found common ground and recognize that while some items are not yet in full agreement, you recognize that the group is capable of moving forward with the discussions that do have consensus. This ensures the student received updated support without delay. You might also discover during this process that some items cannot be decided upon because the group lacks sufficient. For those, highlight exactly what information is missing and take note of it. Placing these on a separate follow-up list ensures the group knows these aren't being ignored, but rather they're being staged for a future discussion. And lastly, for any remaining items that are not in agreement, ensure there's absolute clarity within the specific area where the disagreement exists. By isolating the exact point of contention, you prevent it from stalling the entire IEP and provide clarity on what needs to be addressed through another means. For items or agreement was not reached, ensure that the group has had enough discussion for all relevant information to be shared. Confirm that there are ample opportunities for clarification and that the conversation was thorough. At this point, the school staff will state their final recommendations. Reiterate that these decisions were based on the data reviewed and the input provided, and then document the specific disagreement. Remember, in some circumstances, disagreement is simply going to happen. And when it does, other processes come into play. Our hope is always that the team chooses an alternative dispute resolution approach, though we recognize that due process exists as a formal option as well. We want to highlight that reaching this point should be a last resort. And even if a disagreement persists in one area, there's often agreement in many others. The goal here is to acknowledge both those areas of consensus and the points of disagreement while still working to maintain a positive, collaborative relationship for the sake of the student. The hope is always to reach consensus in a way where participants feel heard and can support, implement, and live with the decisions made. The techniques we reviewed are designed to guide the group through that journey. Ideally, you've reached your destination where everyone feels good about the trip and is ready to move forward towards implementation. At the end of the meeting, review the agreements made throughout. This can be a quick summary based on the check marks on your agenda. Next, review your action items. If the team needs more information or promise to share a resource, be clear on who's responsible for the deadline and for follow-up. Then address any remaining parking lot items. Indicate how and when these will be handled. And before ending, take a moment to show appreciation to everyone, to parents, teachers, administrators, and highlight the strong collaboration that occurred.
Thank you, Stacy. So now we've reached the conclusion of today's webinar presentation on conflict management strategies. Through our work today, you've learned how to facilitate a structured meeting startup to establish a collaborative environment and support for the IEP process, how to identify and utilize process tools that generate momentum and keep the meeting moving forward, and how to apply advanced strategies to navigate impasse while preserving the parent-school relationship or family-school relationship. As a result of today's webinar, what will you do differently? What will you encourage your team members to do differently? And we appreciate the time you are going to take to answer our very brief survey. Again, QR code on the right here of the slide. If you scan that, it's 3 questions, really quick. It's important because it helps us improve our presentations. And we literally take the information from the previous session and adjust it into our ones as we're developing further. So thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you at the next presentation in the webinar series, Trust Building Behavior, which will be held virtually on April 2nd from 8 to 9 a.m. During that session, we will walk through the specific steps to take after the meeting, between meetings, and throughout the IEP process to continue building and maintaining trusting relationships with both school staff and families for the benefit of the student.